without further ado, I'd like to hand over to our moderator for the session, Marc Goodchild. Marc.
Great. Okay, so we're going to try and keep this quite informal. By all means, tweet away, but I can't get my tweet deck to work at the moment, so I won't pass any questions to the panel. But do put up your hand if there's something that you really think, is burning at that point. The way we're going to run the session, we're going to do it in two halves. We're going to do a little bit of exploring the nature of family today and what social media means in families, and particularly about the economics of who's making decisions in the family. And then later on, we're going to look at some best case studies. I'm going to do a little bit of an intro for the beginning. That's me. I have to do a bit of a disclaimer at the beginning. I have done work with that man on your right from Doco, so I do have a slight vested interest, not least because they make very good cupcakes. I've also worked with Julie Adair, who is from ex-BBC, so we've, again, hopefully that means that we can get a little bit more, get past the pleasantries and be a bit more probing. Jane Rumble is from OFCOM. I haven't worked directly with Jane, but I do know some of her colleagues. And Jules Kendrick is from Mumsnet. I'm going to go through, I thought rather than get them to do an introduction, which is what normally happens, and then we sort of have a sort of a corporate sales pitch, I did a little bit of a trawl through them, this being Social Media Week, to find out what I could find with some really lame research in one page of Google. So put in Jules Kendrick, this is who I found. She's the head of client sales at Mumsnet. 163 connections. That's her Facebook page. I've pixelated out her family on her behalf. And there's I don't know whether this is you, Jules, but you apparently, according to this, you like, there are certain books you like, but I've got a feeling that might be a different Jules Kendrick in the States. Is that you?
No, that's not.
Okay. Disclaimer quickly. Maurice Wheeler. From Digital Outlook, or now rebranded Doco, so in case you still know them as Digital Outlook. He also, I found this of him of MySpace. Yeah. Even found this of you on Flickr about your sabbatical. Sounded like a very nice trip. Go to work at Doco. And that's the only thing I could find of you in Facebook. Don't think it's you, is it? Jane Rumble, I couldn't find anything on her. That's probably because she works at OFCOM and therefore has very strict policies about what she can and can't put up online. This was from the voice of the listener and viewer, and she'll have to explain what she does. She's going to do a bit of a presentation a bit later on. And Julie Adair worked at the BBC for quite some time. That's where I met Julie. She then went to work at Disney. She's now an independent consultant in the digital space. So LinkedIn, Julie does very well on it. She's on the 500 plus club. Found that of you, Julie, doing a run in the Great Scottish Run.
One day of sunshine.
On Twitter, and quite a prolific tweeter. So that's their social media profiles. What we're going to talk about today is essentially about the family dynamic, and particularly in the digital age, who's making decisions and what it means to marketeers who are trying to talk to those different parts of the family, whether it's sort of the very old-fashioned view of the world about who wears the trousers in the house. Particularly in the 50s and 60s, the debate was all about men versus women and who was making the financial decisions. This was something from the 50s about how Hoover thought they'd advertise Hoovers to being the present of choice for every woman at Christmas. There's very little in this area about what how those financial decisions get made. I found this from around 1995, which was an academic piece, which was about how family decisions are made between the spouses. And it's interesting, if you look for the dark black, that's where the decisions are. The black is where decisions are jointly made by the husband and wife. And then the slightly greyed out is where the wife makes most of the decisions, and then the clear white is where the husband makes the decisions. So back in the mid-90s, joint decisions on things like gifts to charities, someone trying to call me. Let's get rid of that. Joint decisions around things like charities, the monthly expense budget, the insurance for the wife. Quite a strange concept that was just being treated as separate from the insurance for the husband, where the husband got much more involved in, obviously, his own insurance, didn't really worry about the wife's insurance. But as you're going up the line, at the time, a lot of the big sort of financial choices, the investments in the family, what you're doing on large purchases, all skewed male. This was what the academics were finding at the time. We know that's changing, but there's not very much evidence out there which you can easily pull out to say how the financial dynamics are working. We also know that kids are having a huge impact. This was last Christmas, HSBC worked out that the average family was spending the average person was spending £378 on their immediate family. And increasingly, even in a recession, there was still a lot of money being spent on kids. And I think it was the 25 to 35-year-old age range were spending the most around on kids proportionately to the rest of the family. And we know about Pester Power. Pester Power has been around for ages. You only have to look at the cereal manufacturers to know how important it is to appeal to the children who are going around the supermarket with whoever's making those decisions to try and shape what gets put in the trolley. Last year was really interesting in terms of Toy Story. Last year, 2010, Toy Story 3 was the most successful animated film in history, and a lot of that was put down to their social media campaign. So there was a lot of work trying to target all members of the family through social media. And hopefully we'll talk a little bit about that. And then this was from last year, again, from the Mail, about how teenage daughters probably have the biggest impact on family decision-making. And we know it's sort of happening. It's just very hard to actually dictate or to determine exactly who has what influence, and more importantly, how you get to them. But I just picked out a few of the things, a couple of campaigns I've been looking at, which you get a sense that actually there is something going on, that people are waking up to the power of channeling, sending messages to the whole family and not just individuals in the family. Centre Parks is a very good example where they're pushing very hard. It's about the times you have together that you will carry with you forever as being part of their strap line. They're doing a lot of work behind the scenes, I gather, looking at the data and how people move around their websites, specifically to understand who is looking at which parts of the website and who are then making the purchasing decisions. And even cars, look at this photo. I'm not quite sure when this was from, but this painting, but kids being involved in that decision-making about cars. And we're going to come back to cars specifically in a minute. So the way we worked out the panel is what we want to do is we're going to look at these different channels of how do you talk to the family. And then we're going to explore what's best practice, what are the do's and don'ts, and also look for some case studies potentially of who's doing it really well. So I'm going to kick off with Jules Kendrick from Mumsnet. We all know that mummy bloggers are this force to be reckoned with in terms of trying to now, as gatekeepers of the family. And I think Mumsnet, more than any organisation, know how formidable that audience can be and how you have to get it right. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about what you found at Mumsnet and how you treat the women in your community?
Okay. Well, for those that don't know, Mumsnet launched in 2000.
You've got to be talking to Mike. Yeah.
Mumsnet launched in 2000, so we've been going for 12 years now, and we've got to a point where we've got 2.2 million unique users using the site every single month. And when we look at who these women are, they're well-educated, informed, media-savvy women aged between sort of 25 and 45, tend to have a couple of kids, tend to be 0 to 10-year-olds. They're very aware of advertisers and brands. They're very aware that they're a community that brands want to talk to, but perhaps don't know how to. What we found is that we did some research a couple of years ago, and they felt that brands talked down to them, still thought of them as the kind of 1950s housewife, that all they're interested in is Fairy Liquid and Bisto and washing their kids' clothes. And actually recently I went to see P&G, and actually they do talk a hell of a lot about laundry, but they're also talking about everything that you could possibly imagine. And as Mark just said, you know, these are the gatekeepers to the family. So they're the ones who are making the decisions, and they want brands to interact with them. They don't want brands to talk to them. They certainly don't want brands to talk down to them. What they want is for brands to ask them what they want. And when they ask them, to listen to what they've got to say. And when they've listened, to actually do something about it. And I think we're going to come on later to some examples of brands that have done that incredibly well on Mumsnet. But I think it's also looking at how mums are using social media a lot more than, you know, that they ever have done in the past. And just giving you some stats on Mumsnet, you know, 60% of Mumsnetters have a smartphone. 40% of our users access Mumsnet via their smartphones. 85% use Facebook. 35% use Twitter. They spend nearly 3 hours online every single day. I'm not sure when they're working or looking after their kids, but 11% of them have their own blog. And the reason that this community has grown, without giving you too much history, but it's basically, you know, we live in this fractured society now. When you become a parent, it can be incredibly isolating and scary. Yes, it's full of wonder and joy, and we love having babies, but it can be really scary. And if you live 200 miles away from your mum and you work full-time, you've never held a baby before, how do you find out what it's like to be a parent? And that's where networks and communities like Mumsnet basically provide this lifeline. And then you build up a community of like-minded women that you want to spend time with and talk to. And obviously there's the anonymity as well, the fact that you might say something on your community that you wouldn't say to your best friend because no one knows who you are. So if you've had a crappy day at work and you've come home and you've shouted at your kids and you think you're a terrible mum and you sit down with your glass of wine, you get your smartphone or your laptop and you start chatting going, oh my God, I'm a terrible mother. And 100 other women go, no, you're not. I've had exactly the same day as you. So this is why this sort of amazing community has grown, and why they're using Mumsnet. It's really about advice, it's about support, and it's really about recommendation. And I think it's important, one of our sort of mantras when we're talking to our clients who are trying to integrate with the Mumsnet community is these are women who have children. So they're not just mums. So yes, they are interested in nappies and whether they should breastfeed or bottle feed, about potty training, about how they're going to educate their children. But they're just as interested in their careers and their relationships and what car they're going to buy and what mortgage they should have and what they're going to wear when they actually get to go out on a night out, you know, once a month on a Saturday with the husband. So that's how brands need to talk to them. And they are recommending to each other. And I think that's a real buzzword, certainly for us this year. It's recommendation. So instead of just taking out an MPU on their network or on within their community, come and talk to them. Come and ask them what they think about your product. Or if you're actually bringing something to market, come and ask them what they think about your concept. I think, you know, we see a lot of advertisers who have panels and they say, we've spoken to, you know, 1,000 mums. And for a lot of communities, they're like, well, who is that mum? You haven't spoken to me. You haven't asked me what I want. You haven't asked me how I want you to interact with me. And so brands that have been able to really integrate into that community and talk to them and show that they're listening are the ones that have been successful for this community. And I think it is, you know, when you've got 2.2 million mums recommending, you want them to be recommending your product. And I think what social media has given these women is they've given them you know, a soapbox. So, you know, they can stand up and say, this is what I think about something. I remember talking to the marketing director at P&G. She said, when I started in marketing 25 years ago, it was basically, we had this sort of adage that, you know, if you got it wrong, your customer would tell 10 people. If you got it right, they'd only tell 3 people. Now with social media, if you get it wrong, they'll tell everybody. And if you get it right, they'll tell everybody. So it's so much harder now for marketeers. You've got to get it right, because everyone's got, you know, somewhere that they can go and have a moan about you. But equally, when you get it right, somewhere that they can go and recommend you. So that's really what we're kind of saying, sort of top tips, as I would say, is number 1, don't patronise them. They can't stand it. I mean, who can? Don't just treat them as mums. Ask them what they want. Don't tell them what you think they want. Then listen to what they've got to say and be incredibly honest and transparent with them, and they will become great ambassadors for you, and they will amplify your message. So they'll talk about it on their community. So Mumsnetters will talk about it on Mumsnet, but they will tweet about it, they'll Facebook about it, they'll write in their blogs, they'll tell the mums at the school gate, and they're the group that you want to get in with. So that would be my advice.
So when you're talking about the Mumsnet audience, you make it sound like there's a sort of a nice, happy discord going on. Presumably, it's hundreds of different audiences. How do you cope with the broad church?
It is very difficult, and depending on who you talk to, you'll probably get a different idea of what the Mumsnet community is like. I think whenever you get that many women together, you're going to get a huge range of opinions. I mean, there tends, it's a debate, basically. Everything is a debate. And I think it is difficult because just like we have, everyone talking about private versus state education, whether they use environmentally friendly goods or they don't, it can be anything. But I think the thing is it's about asking them, rather than telling them, asking them what they're interested in and asking them to debate. And I think it's hard, it is hard to target them as a group, but generally it's a case of getting them to trial your product and getting them to talk about it. Because generally, although they may have differing opinions, they're still got similar lives. These are like-minded women who lead similar lifestyles. So they're going to want the same things. And I think for any product, you're going to find out what those are by talking to them.
And the aspect of authenticity sort of versus cynical sort of marketing at them. Did you, at the early days, was there much pushback on the fact that Mumsnet is a community which is essentially their community, but is now
it's very difficult, because up until 2006 we didn't really take advertising, and there's a very fine balance for us between our community, because without our community we're nothing. So we have to be very careful commercially. So it's why we want brands to integrate with them rather than shout at them from their advertising. It's a good example is in 2007 we changed the design of Mumsnet. It had been the same since 2000. It was very old-fashioned, so we changed the design, and we stupidly didn't listen to ourselves and ask them what they thought first. And there was absolute uproar. And they were saying, it's like you've come into my living room and changed my wallpaper without asking me. And that's what it felt like to them, because this is their site, and we very much make them feel like that. So when we work with brands, it's why we have a list of advertisers that we don't work with, and a list of advertisers who we would only ever talk to the community about first. So a good example is we previously would never work with McDonald's. And then last year, McDonald's came to us and said, look, we've made a lot of changes. We've looked at best practice. We're much healthier than we were. We really want to talk to your mums. Would you let us? And so we went onto the boards and asked them, McDonald's want to talk to you. Do you want to listen? And this time round, they said yes. They have made some changes. So yeah, we're open to listening to them. It doesn't mean we're going to buy, but we're there to listen. And so it's a continuous two-way conversation, and it's the same for brands that work with us. It's a two-way conversation, and just talk to them in the best way you can.
Okay, we'll come back to the mums in a minute. Mo, you've been doing quite a bit of work looking at dads as being a sort of the forgotten group, and men typically on social networks there aren't that many places where blokes cluster around the dad site or the daddy blogger.
No, there's not.
We on? Try again.
No, there's not.
Yeah.
No, there's not a kind of, well, there are some dad's nets and there are a few kind of daddy bloggers, but we actually see that what dads are doing online isn't much different from what men of the same age are doing online. I think for me, the interesting thing with dads is that they are kind of being forgotten. I think the mums have done a fantastic job of kind of positioning themselves as an interesting audience to talk to, and the dads, particularly now as the world is changing and there are more dads out of work, therefore there are more dads who are becoming sole carers and therefore are taking on a lot of the responsibilities as far as decisions on what gets bought and what doesn't get bought within the household, so they're actually becoming much more influential. that's kind of the dad's thing, and across the board, the thing that I've been really interested in recently is how generally that family purchase dynamic has fundamentally changed so much. Whereas it used to be, the kind of either the mum or the dad. I think there's some really interesting stuff going on at the moment with how kids are getting involved, and how the decision-making process within the family kind of bounces around all the different members of the family. And we've been looking, in the same way I think you've been looking. There's not a lot of stuff out there as far as how it's all happening, and I see actually that dynamic of how decisions are made within the family is constantly changing. I think as families are more limited in their resources, both financially and with time, they're going to want to make sure that the decisions that they make are right. So I have this thing about us, brands can often create a soft landing for their products. So if a mum's going to go out and buy something, what she's going to want to make sure of is that it's the right thing, that the kids are going to like it. The last thing they want to do is buy something and all the kids go, I don't want to use it, I don't want to play with it, and therefore they've wasted their money. So I think in these times, parents are particularly conscious of wasting money. So I think they're going to involve the family a lot more in that decision-making process. I also think generally kind of in the West, we're trying to make our children much more consumer savvy, which means that we are encouraging them to make purchase decisions more and be involved in that purchase process more. So I think that's another reason why that whole kind of family dynamic is changing. I also think that the way that Western society is moving as well, that there's a change in roles. As I say, dads are kind of staying at home more and mums are being the kind of out at work. There's more step families, there's more kind of non-traditional nuclear families existing. And in those scenarios where the roles aren't so cut and dry as they were in the 50s, again, it requires a lot more collaboration within the family to make decisions rather than saying, well, the dad's natural role is to make the decision on insurance for the wife. I don't think that's kind of the same. So I think there's some really interesting stuff at play at the moment within that whole family dynamic. And I think the dads is one particularly interesting area that a few people are beginning to realize they are a kind of forgotten member of the family in some respects. And I think people are doing some great work there. And I think also the kids is an interesting one. We did some research recently into looking at how much control or how much influence kids have over the family spend, and looking at a whole bunch of research that was done by lots of different people. In the UK, about £3.7 billion a week is spent by families. And if you start including the US and you basically start including all the English-speaking countries, then that number starts getting up to around £40 billion a week is spent by families. That's equivalent of about $100,000 a second is spent by families. So they're an extraordinarily important group of people. And looking at the research and looking at what they influence and looking at the different types of products that they influence, about 51% of that spend is dictated by children. So children, in theory, are controlling the spend of, just within those English-speaking countries, they're controlling about $1 trillion a year. So they're a very, very interesting market, and I think the interesting thing for marketeers is, particularly within the social media week environment, is how do we unlock that potential of children, if you like? How do we allow them to contribute to the purchase decision, but at the same time be conscious of the fact that not a lot of parents might want them to be included in the purchase decision, and the last thing we want is the pester power route, because that's that doesn't work for anyone. So it's looking at how that whole purchase decision, and I think the Centre Parks is a good example. There's lots of ways that Centre Parks can involve kids about being excited about Centre Parks without necessarily using them as the main sales device and sales tool. So that's the thing I'm really interested in. At the moment, I don't think there is an answer, and it gets very, very complicated. But so yeah.
And do you think that it is just a growing sense of pester power, the kids are getting more savvy, or you've hinted that it's you think that there's also a correlation with the fact that we're in economic downturn means actually there's a people are being much more cautious about where they're spending their money. And I'm wondering whether it's dads being, in the past they might have frittered away the money on a lovely car which is going to suit them. Now there's a bit of a guilt factor that it's got to work for the whole family.
A little bit, but I think, but it's not necessarily, limited resources can be time as well. Yeah. And I think more and more, and I don't think that's necessarily a reflection of the economic scenario that we're in, but I think more and more parents are feeling guilty about the amount of time they spend with their children. So, and we've seen, we kind of saw a movement. I think we're seeing a movement more towards spending more kind of just not necessarily quality time, just time with your children. And I think, therefore, just making sure that the time you spend with your children is the right type of time. So therefore, again, making sure you're involving children in that decision-making process. Because, the last thing you want to do is say, I know everyone, let's go horse riding, and then you realise halfway through that none of your children like horse riding. So therefore, you're going to want to make sure that that time that you spend with them is good quality time. So they're going to be involved in that decision. But it's not just the economics and the time thing. I also think we see that children are becoming the experts in the house on so many things as well. And again, that's not necessarily a reflection of the economic times. But there's some great stuff that's come through from OFCOM about kind of 60% of parents think that their kids know more about the internet than they do. And 15% of parents turn to their children for buying products like TVs first, and we've done loads of qual sessions, done some great stuff with Sherbet over there, and we were speaking to some kids, and the dad got his 9-year-old child to pick the mobile phone that the dad was going to buy because he was convinced that the 9-year-old would know far more about what phone is the right kind of phone to get than he would. So, children are becoming much more savvy in the world of research, in the world of understanding what's the good stuff to buy and what not good to buy. So they're actually becoming experts within the household on products that they weren't formerly experts in. Therefore, they're actually being called upon as an expert in the decision-making process as much as just a contributor or a consumer of the product.
And finally, from your experience, where are dads finding that information? It's not at the school gates. It's not at the likes of a Mumsnet.
I think through all the normal channels. I think they, I think there's still. I mean, they are obviously involved in social media, but as I say, we looked at. I think we picked like a 30-year-old man with no children, a 30-year-old man with children. And the difference in their social media consumption, the difference in their TV consumption, the difference in 99% of their lifestyle habits were exactly the same. The one thing that was different is that dads actually blog less than non-dads, and we think that's probably because they have less time to kind of dedicate to blogging. But then there's counter-arguments that mums seem to blog more than non-mums, so I don't know kind of where that comes in. But so actually, the medium in which you reach dads is exactly the same as a medium in which you reach men. It's much more around the conversation you have within that medium rather than the medium itself. Perfect.
Okay, so we've talked quite a bit about the parents in the relationship, in the family relationship, but obviously, as you suggested, the kids are having a lot more influence and say. 5-10 years ago, that would have been probably most of their channels to the kids would have been through traditional media, so magazines, television, radio, potentially. But the last 10 years have been, or the last 5 years particularly, have been absolutely driven by digital. I'm going to hand over to Jay now. He's going to talk through some of the stuff that they've been researching at OFCOM, just to give a perspective on where kids are actually at now and whether they're one homogenous audience. So it should just click on, yeah.
Cheers, thanks very much. Is the mic on? Great. Yeah, as Mark said, I'm Jane Rumble. I work at OFCOM and I look after our media research. And I wanted to spend a few minutes sharing some of our research findings with you. We carry out this work because it's very important for us as the media regulator to understand what children are doing online, their attitudes, and also what parents think about it too and what they're doing. And so I'm going to drill in and focus in particular on younger children, as I've been asked to do so for this session, but you'll see that I've also got information on what older children are doing. And I think one of the most striking things that you'll see is obvious when you think about it, but younger children have quite different media habits to older children, so the 5 to 7s are doing very different things to the older children, and the internet becomes much more an important medium as children get older. So, to set the scene, we are interested in what children think about the different media, and we've asked this question in our media literacy tracker for a number of years about what medium would you miss the most if it was taken away from you. And for the younger children on the left-hand side here, almost a majority of children, about half of children, say that they would miss television the most if it was taken away from them. And in fact, the internet in green, there's only 7% of that younger age group saying that it would be the internet that they would miss the most. So it's not an important medium for this younger age group. Whereas as children move to 8 to 11 and get a bit older, you can see the internet is becoming slightly more important, but not so much. Television's still a big deal. And for 12 to 15s, that's where you see this shift with the quarter of 12 to 15s saying that they would miss the internet the most if it was taken away from them. And in fact, also, interestingly, mobile phones are becoming more and more important for that older age group. And this is very much linked to smartphone take up amongst that group. And it's the first time that we've seen mobile phones being in pole position for that older age group.
Sorry, can I just ask a
Sure.
When you say play games, is that like a physical game or a video game?
Playing games is video games, yes. So it's somewhere down there, yeah, games on a games console or video games, yeah.
Can I just ask,
Sure.
did you ask them if they were accessing on-demand or iPlayer via the laptop? So that would...
So where does it kind of fit? Any use of any internet activity, whether it's iPlayer or any catch-up services, would come in under the internet as well, rather than under watching television. So it's a really good question. We started to explore that specifically in the last few years to make sure there wasn't a mix-up in what children were thinking about. But this is linear broadcast TV over here. And this follows through a similar story as to the amount of time that children are spending doing different media activities at home. Television in the purple, 15 hours a week, children say they are spending watching TV at home. These aren't obviously the industry bar figures, this is children saying this to us. But that compares quite starkly with the internet at about 5.5 hours per week in green for the 5 to 7s. And you see this picture changing, so by the time children get to 12 to 15, they're spending almost as much time on the internet as they are watching television. So that's really kind of scene setter, so that when we start looking more at 5 to 7s online, it's to bear in mind that television is really a big deal for that younger age group. So the internet. Like I said, we've been running this survey for a number of years, so we have some rich trend data. And before I go on, I should have said this at the start, all of this information is published on our website, these slides, full reports, and if you do have any questions and want to know more, please do contact me. But this is showing us that over time, the proportion of children who go online at home who are younger, it's about 2/3 of that age group who are doing that, whereas for 12 to 15s, it's almost all 12 to 15s are going online at home. So it's, again, a varying picture by age, but interestingly, not so much of an increase for the 5 to 7s over time from 2009 to 2011, whereas the older children, there is an increased take-up and use of the internet at home, whereas a steady state for the younger kids. Who are children online with, and are parents supervising when children go online? What is the situation, the context in which children are sitting down and using the internet? Well, we know that for 5 to 7s, only 10% of them are going online without either a parent or an older brother or sister or a caregiver with them when they're going online. So it's very clear that you can infer that for younger kids, it's a shared experience with a parent, a caregiver, or an older brother or sister. It's not a private space situation of the child with the computer or smartphone. Whereas 12 to 15s, over half of them are going online on their own. And we also know that for that particular age group, they're more likely to also have internet access in their bedroom as well. So it's an added layer of a situation where it's a private space for older children, whereas for younger children it's a supervised and shared online experience with other people. It's also important for us to understand what are the kids doing when they go online, what are they up to. Here is a very small amount of all the different activities that we track, but rather than overwhelm you with all of our data, I've picked out the top 5. So the younger children here, 5 to 7s, about a third of them are using the internet on a weekly basis for schoolwork or homework. Playing games online is more popular with this younger age group, whereas social networking isn't an activity that the younger kids are doing on a regular basis, and the same for downloading or playing music. Now, to add a little bit of information, that social networking question does not include sites like Club Penguin or Moshi Monsters, and for those types of social networking site, we see that they are more popular for the 5 to 7s and 8 to 11s, and much more popular than the older age groups. So it's predominantly schoolwork, homework, and playing games that the younger kids are using the internet for. We can also draw on other data from Nielsen in order to understand what are the sites that children are visiting. And for the 5 to 7s, this is the range of the top 10 sites. It's almost a year old. Apologies, we will be getting some new data out there soon. But quite a range of different sites from Google. You've got the television, the importance of the television medium coming through with BBC and Disney Online. But you've also got some sites that aren't dedicated children's sites, in particular YouTube and Facebook. They're coming through as popular sites visited within the course of a month by these children. So not necessarily regularly, but they are visited. And very similar for the 8 to 11s. The colour coding indicates the same site again, so there's very little variation. The only site that drops off is Disney as the children get older. Now to the social networking, and in particular Facebook. We've got here the age of child across the bottom and the proportion of children who have a social networking profile. So this isn't simply that they're going to Facebook and looking at the content online, it's that they've got their own profile. And you see that the moment that children begin to go to secondary school between the ages of 10 and 11, you've got that sharp increase, so that over half of 10-year-olds have got a social networking profile on a site like Facebook, going right up to 90% of kids by the time they get to 15. So it is an important activity, particularly as the children get older. A little bit of context as to then what's it like when they're online, what kind of things are happening. Well, we know that 6 in 10 parents say they're listed as a friend on their child's social networking profile. And so again, I think that's interesting to talk to that shared experience that a majority of parents are friends with their children on their SM profile, and so they have a sense of what's going on there. As to their privacy settings and children's attitudes towards privacy, well, most children say their profile can only be seen by friends and nobody else. And that's for the 8 to 11s and the 12 to 15s. And we've seen that increase over time. And certainly from our perspective, when we're trying to understand what are the digital literacy skills of children of different age groups, it's useful for us to see these changes over time as privacy settings increase and children are reflecting on their personal data online. What are they doing when they're social networking? Most children, this is 8 to 11s and 12 to 15s. Fortunately, we don't measure the 5 to 7s here. They are talking to family and friends. That's by far the most popular thing that they're doing when they're online. But they also talk to people who are friends of friends, but much less likely to be the case. And so on the far right here, there's only a small proportion of kids who talk to people who are not directly known to them. So it's a social networking situation about finding out stuff such as music, sharing information, catching up with people, but it's very much catching up to people who are friends and family. So I talked a little bit about kids. Also, of course, we're interested in parents and what parents think and what they do to help their children stay safe online. And we track this information about parental attitudes towards their children online and whether they trust them to stay safe, whether they think their children know enough to stay safe. And we can see that the majority of children have spoken to their child about staying safe, their child or children. They trust their child to stay safe, and they feel they know enough about keeping their child safe. And obviously it's an evolving situation with new services coming online and different means of access, and smartphones are going up and you can go online via your games console. So it's an ongoing situation that parents need to keep up to date with, And as Maurice was saying, it's a situation where, in fact, parents also admit that their children know more about the internet than they do. So this is a half of parents across 5 to 15s, but that rises rapidly as children get older. So it's something like 70% of parents say that their older kids know more about the internet than they do. So there's quite a tension there about trusting your child, talking to your child about staying safe, but also keeping up to date with developments and admitting or acknowledging that their children probably know more about the technical side and the technologies than they do. So that kind of pulls together some of the information that we have about children online and their behaviours. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a flavour, and I'm happy to kind of take questions or discuss with everybody what they think about it.
Any quick questions about the figures?
Any real difference between boys and girls?
Yes, yeah, stark differences. I picked up the ages here, particularly for the focus of the younger children part of the session today, but all of our reports cover gender differences, boys and girls. Boys are much more likely to be playing games online, in particular the case for older boys, whereas older girls are more likely, for example, to be using their smartphone and using their smartphone for social networking. So I would say probably television to one side, anything to do with the internet, it is worth exploring those gender differences because we see them amongst each age group.
I'm quite curious about the Facebook. It's fine.
Just need you to speak into the mic for
Yep.
the broadcast.
The Facebook stats for the 5 to 7-year-olds, which I think it was 40% of kids had looked at Facebook.
Yeah.
Did you actually ask them if they were just looking and sort of lurking, or whether they actually have their own Facebook profiles?
Yeah, we know that we ask them whether they have their own Facebook profile, and very few kids aged 5 to 7 do. It's very much by the time children get to the age of 10 that it starts increasing for their own SM profile. However, we also know that children do visit those sites even if they don't have their own profile. So profiles happen by the time children get to secondary school, but that doesn't mean that younger children aren't visiting sites like Facebook. They are.
The qual stuff that we've been doing, we've seen particularly for the younger age, those kind of 5, 6, 7, 8s, what they're typically doing is going on their parents' accounts and playing games.
Yeah.
So vast majority, when you talk to anyone under 7, 8, why do you go on Facebook? They'll say, oh, Farmville, Cityville, Petville, whatever it is, whatever that game of choice is. So it's less so that they're going on to chat to friends.
Mm.
We're going to come back to the sort of issue of Facebook and what's happening, particularly about what's regulated and what's unregulated in a second. I just want to bring Julie in now. Do you want to?
Yeah, sit down. Yeah.
Because Julie, you've been on the other side of those figures in terms of working when you were working at Disney about what you do with your existing channels. You know, and TV being a very good channel to drive a lot of that internet traffic. I know at the BBC, we work very hard about moving our television audience into our children's areas for CBeebies and CBBC, and spent a lot of energy in trying to make sure that they were safe environments for children. You're doing the same.
Absolutely.
Tell us about how attitudes have even changed within Disney over the time about, because originally Disney used to have adverts all over the place.
Well, the websites still do have ad placements, yes. But if we're talking about social, what we were doing more of at Disney was looking at social in the realm of community, not kind of always on message boards, but we did a really interesting experiment last spring with a social TV sort of session for Wizards of Waverly Place, where we live blogged throughout a block of programming as the new season started. And then we brought in one of the stars to do, in effect, a live chat. And it was very interesting how kids responded to that, because they were so used to instant chat, whether it be on MSN or on Facebook, that when it came to putting a question or contributing a comment about the program as it was going through, or can you believe he just did that, or what do you think about her skirt, all the way through to chatting to this star, they couldn't quite get to grips with the idea that there was a kind of a queue and the stuff was being moderated.
The internet was broken.
Yeah, there really was. There were questions about what's happening, why can't I get through? And so that was an interesting experiment. It did great numbers for us, but it was an interesting experiment about the immediacy that kids feel around community or social events. We do the same with a lot of UGC at Disney. We do a lot of UGC content, whether it's drawings or videos or whatever. And that, again, kids have an expectation after YouTube, and you touched on that a minute ago, Jane. I mean, we talk about what kids do online. If kids do contribute to YouTube, and they tend not to be in the main, but those who are not going to YouTube just to watch where they are going in their millions, but actually to upload their own videos, expect a level of speed around that, which when you're trying to moderate that content to make sure that what's coming through is appropriate, it takes that bit longer. And again, that question of immediacy began to be an issue for kids because they couldn't work out why it would take longer than 10 minutes to get that video up there, which it does when they put up their skateboarding or their makeup video or their game walkthrough on YouTube.
But I'm presuming from the stuff I've seen of Disney over the years, making sure you're watertight in your policies and things like that is actually quite an important reputational thing now for children's or for a media company which
Absolutely.
Actively goes out to talk to children.
Absolutely. I mean, it was interesting when Jules talked about McDonald's and Mumsnet. In recent years, Disney has had an active policy of not working with companies who produce food which we perceive to be over fat, over salt, over sugar. So the Muppets campaign, which is huge and very present right now, if you go to the Disney UK homepage this morning, the pre-roll ad is an ad for Cravendale milk with the Muppets. It's actually a very funny little clip. But milk is far better than fast food. So we are very aware of what we do around brands and brand partnerships and brand relationships.
And that's probably true of most of the children's media companies.
Oh, absolutely. No, I'm sure Nick and Cartoon Network are exactly the
but
same.
that's self-regulated. That's you
Yes.
coming up with your own things. Whereas in television, it's been much more directed in terms of what you can and can't do on your channel.
Yes, and it's getting more regulated. It's interesting. I mean, you'll know more about this than I do, probably, Jane and Mo. But I mean, if you look at the regulations now around advertising to children, which is interesting about what you're saying about how kids contribute to this, because we are becoming much stricter about how we advertise to children. But on the same side, we're loosening our stays slightly when it comes to product placement. And you look at last year on Channel 4 with the T4 programme around fashion, sponsored by New Look. In a very, and I hate the word, transmedia way, it was everywhere. And I know that my 13-year-old niece, that was her shop of choice on the high street. So all of a sudden, New Look is all over T4. That's a marketing win if ever there was one.
And I know some of the ITV shows are now
Yes, we were talking last night about Annabelle Carmel. So Annabelle Carmel is a very interesting one. You know, it plays directly, and don't take this the wrong way, Jules, but plays directly to the sort of NCT mums crowd, and it's the lovely, you know, make your own food for your children, puree it, put it in the freezer, and there you go. And it's a particular type of mum, perhaps. And now that particular type of mum's child is getting Cook with Annabelle Carmel and some cute little Muppet-type penguins on CITV. So that's a really interesting. Yeah, well, is it sponsored?
Sponsored, yeah.
So she's there. There's cute penguins, and you know, look, Mummy, it's Annabelle Carmel. Didn't I have her cauliflower puree last night? And
so just, you know, as a huge media organisation, you're sort of when you were at Disney, sort of trapped in two worlds. One which was this safe, regulated world of where you know what you've got to do, and you also got your reputational bit. But then there's this sort of huge lurking thing of YouTube and Facebook and where did you act with children's brands? Did Disney actively go onto those spaces to talk to children because you knew they were there?
We have channels. Disney has channels around Disney Channel and Disney Junior. And for those of you who were watching the trade press towards the tail end of last year, we've made a partnership with YouTube to share content and to create original content online. One of the first things, I'm sure you've all heard of Where's My Water, one of the first products coming out of that will be original online generated web-only animations around Swampy, the alligator from Where's My Water. And that will, you know, be part of the YouTube deal, and money from that will fund it.
But how do you protect those spaces which are...
That's a really interesting one, because I mean, you only have to look, I don't know how many of you were at the Children's Media Conference last year, but Dubbit up in Leeds did an amazing bit of research with David Kleeman of the American Children's Media Organization about what kids do on YouTube and the number of children going on YouTube and what their behaviors are and what they're watching. And I think children are increasingly using YouTube, and I wonder whether you next year, when you look at those numbers again, the discrepancy between the kids who are watching linear television, be it through iPlayer or be it on television, compared to those who are sitting watching 20 to 30 minutes of YouTube at a time, will possibly change. The worrying thing, I think, for Disney and for any broadcaster who's putting their content on YouTube, in fact, anybody who's putting children's content on YouTube, is the comment system. Now, you can turn them off and tweak them, but I mean, if any of you have ever scrolled down and read through the comments on even the most innocuous clips, they go into all kinds of language and all kinds of topics that I find offensive, and I'm not 7 years old.
Yeah. So you've got YouTube, which isn't prohibited to the under 13s, and then you've got the social networks, which are, in their terms and conditions, are saying, you shouldn't be here, effectively.
No. But they are.
But they are. We're going to talk briefly now about the regulation, what is happening, as much as anything for, just to get some views on it. I don't want to sort of spend the rest of the session all about regulation, but we have in the last 2 or 3 years had sort of two quite prominent reports come out. First of all, the Byron Review, which focused mostly around safety, and it was the 3 C's that came out about making sure content was appropriate content, not allowing inappropriate contact, and the 3rd C, which was context, I think. So that was much more. That was about making sure that children weren't sort of actually being led into areas which are actually dangerous to them. And so it was looking at sort of how do you protect against internet stalking, etc. And then in last year we've had the Bailey Review, which was much more about sort of the influence of advertising, imagery, etc. on kids, not because it's illegal, but because of what it's doing to children. I think you were quite involved with the Bailey Review in.
Yeah, well, Mumsnet ran a campaign called Let Girls Be Girls, which is basically the forerunner to the Bailey Report. Is this working? I don't know. And doesn't sound like it. And hello. And so the Let Girls Be Girls, which was very much came off the back of what the community on Mumsnet wanted, which was basically about preventing the early sexualisation of our pre-teens, with everything from slogans on the back of tracksuit trousers and on their t-shirts, porn star, to basically our kids growing up too young. They're being bombarded now with messages from from the minute they wake up to the minute they go to sleep, be it from the smartphones, when they're at school, from advertising and on TV. And so the Let Girls Be Girls was very much giving the Mumsnetters a voice to kind of say, it's not all right, it's not acceptable. And it also sort of asked that question: is who is responsible? There are. It's not very Mumsnet, but there are some people who think, well, surely it's up to the parents. The parents choose what your children buy, and what you buy for their children. But on Mumsnet, it's much more about, we are a community. Society should act as a community, and we should all be looking out for our children, who are the next generation. So it is the responsibility of advertisers and brands and communities and parents to make sure that our children are protected as much as possible until they're old enough to make their own decisions, whatever age that may be. So the Bailey Report we felt was incredibly important, because it was it wasn't about legislation, it wasn't about advertisers being told they can't do something, but it's about saying you can do it, but should you? And just because you can make a T-shirt for 50p that says porn star on it, and you can sell it, and lots of 8-year-olds want to buy it for God knows what reason, it doesn't mean you should. And it was basically brands and the British Retail Consortium and communities like Mumsnet coming together and saying it's not acceptable, and we need to stop it. And if we band together, which is what communities should do, we can make a change that doesn't require the government to pull in legislation.
And there were some specific recommendations, things like not being able to buy your way into children, get child advocates in the playground. Mo, I know you've been, some of the conversations you're having around when is an advocate a bought advocate, and when are you rewarding natural loyalty with children who might be fans of something. Is that a practical a practical rule to say, you can't actually reward loyalty?
It's a very, very hard one to try and legislate against, for starters. I mean, right back in the day, about 10 odd years ago, we used to do a lot of stuff in the music industry, and I'm sorry to say that we were very responsible for launching Busted. And one of the initiatives that we launched Busted with was the street team. And that was one of those things that was kind of felt like a strange grey area. And I think that those kind of examples aren't around anymore, but there are similar things. And the idea behind the street team were, we had lots of people out there who were, lots of kids who were out there screaming and shouting about how great Busted were, and who were coming to the record label going, I want to scream and shout and tell all my friends about how great Busted are. Could you give me some posters to put up around school? So we kind of formalised that and gave them posters. And then, so that's one of those grey areas. Are we employing them as advocates, or are we just enabling them to do what they do already? So it's very, very hard. I mean, yeah, the kind of, and you hear these stories about how some brands are, kind of going and interviewing a classroom of 7-year-old kids, finding out who is the coolest kid, taking them to one side and giving them products, and almost getting that 7-year-old to become like an Avon lady for their classroom. That's bad. And I think everyone can agree that that's very, very bad. But it's that strange middle area, grey, if someone wants to shout about how much of a fan of Club Penguin they are Club Penguin going to tell them not to shout about it? Are they going to enable them to shout about it? And where is that line? And
particularly with a whole load of sort of internet mechanics around gamification and points and rewards, that's becoming prevalent everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. But then I think that gamification is different, because gamification is probably around a self-motivation rather than an external kind of influencer motivation. And yeah, you've got to be very careful with the points that you're not, encouraging children to be advocates against what they would naturally be doing through some kind of reward points, because you end up down that Avon route. But you can be intelligent about how you do that.
Julie, you wanted to come in?
No, I was just interested in the idea that gamification is coming in. I don't know how many of you have clocked that Weight Watchers are now talking about playing Weight Watchers, which is really interesting. It doesn't say it's going to be a horrible diet and you're going to have to cut out chocolate and never have chips again. It's saying you can play at losing weight. I don't quite understand how that works. But I'm interested in the idea of the Avon lady thing, because I think there are some brands for kids, particularly teenagers, where it's much more about them joining that club. We touched briefly on how many more kids than perhaps we are aware of are now on Twitter. And then the number of brands they follow on Twitter is much more of a kind of conscious choice to do that, rather than have something pushed at them. So things like Hollister, for example. If you look at the Hollister feed, it's not just about this week's new jumper, it's about the music they're playing in store and the soundtrack of Hollister, and it's all about the kind of style and the Californian surfing ethos. So I think what's interesting is this idea of brands and children, and where children actively engage with them of their own volition, whether that's liking it on Facebook or whether it's following a feed on Twitter. And that's something which I think we're seeing very early days in. And I'd be very interested to see what drives a kid to do that and what they get out of it.
And the other thing that Bailey talked about was a lot about the offline world, about making sure you don't have gratuitous posters outside schools and things. Is it possible to replicate that in the sort of the digital world where kids are, where there are NPUs coming on, any site that has signed up to Google AdWords?
I guess Mo would know more about this. I mean, I just wonder how much kids are consciously aware of NPUs and leaderboards on websites. I think they tend to be. I mean, I know that Disney will carry adverts for Kung Fu Panda in the same way as Cartoon Network will carry adverts for Toy Story 3. And then I think it blurs with the child, what they're interested in is the brand. And the brand, in that case, is not Cartoon Network, it's Kung Fu Panda or it's Toy Story 3. So I think it's interesting to see how children make that distinction between what is a brand and where they're being marketed to, and it's just something they're interested in because everyone in the playground is talking about Kung Fu Panda too.
Okay. Jane, I just want to bring you in there, because there has been quite a lot of effort about educating kids around part of the curriculum, about understanding brands. The internet safety now is part of every school. But you touched on it in your figures around, but where are the parents in all of this? Do you see that actually there's more effort now being made to make sure the parents know exactly how to help their children through this
Yeah, I certainly think that in the last 2 to 3, 4 years post-Byron, there have been a number of initiatives that have focused very much on helping parents to be aware of the benefits and risks and helping their children stay safe and make informed decisions online related to media and commercial literacy. To name 2, out of the Byron Review, the UK Council for Child Internet Safety was set up, which is a really positive collaboration of over 150 members across industry and government and regulators that have initiatives and lead on ways of helping to raise awareness and communicate with parents and with children, and to try and also look at ways of developing consistent messages so that parents aren't necessarily confused, because they might go to a number of different sites and get a slightly different take or a slightly different way of communicating something. So for Safer Internet Day last week, UKIS launched some safety guidelines. Was that a message? Yep. Okay, I'm going on. Some safety guidelines which are targeted at, which are a collaborative industry initiative developed by a massive range of different industry stakeholders to then work together to provide consistent messages. So that's one positive initiative. Another one, I guess at a broader regulatory level, was the parent port that was came out of the Bailey Review, which is all of the different regulators coming together across OFCOM, the ASA, press complaints, BBFC, so a range of regulators. There's now a parent port where parents can go and make a complaint or give informal feedback in order that it's designed to help them so that they can know where to go and know what happens next in individual situations. But it also helps a kind of informal feedback loop to all of the organisations who form part of that, who can then stay in tune with what parents are thinking.
And do you see corporate companies about taking more responsibility in this area now? I remember 3 or 4 years ago when we were looking about parental PIN protection and things like that, it was trying to get anyone to engage with that stuff was sort of, please don't pester us anymore about this stuff. It's just it puts parents off. Whereas I'm getting the impression now that actually people are seeing that this is actually it's a good PR point to be family friendly. Is that true? Do you see that?
I don't know if I can kind of answer that directly looking historically, but certainly looking at the way in which industry is coming together and work together, for example, with this UKIS initiative on safety messages, there are a vast range of different commercial organisations that work together through that vehicle, and we're very collaborative in then saying, yeah, we want to be part of this and we want to make sure that we're helping children and helping parents, and it feels very, very positive initiatives and a groundswell of support working across industry.
Jules, have you sensed the sort of a shift that actually it's all right now, it's quite cool to be family friendly and family considerate?
Yeah, well, Mumsnet actually launched our Family Friendly Awards last year, our Family Friendly programme. Very much, again, off the back of what the Mumsnet community was asking us to do, with the idea of campaigning to get companies, brands to be more family friendly. And it was very much, mums were saying that we'll just vote with our feet. If you're not family friendly, then we won't buy from you, we won't use your services. So yes, I definitely seeing brands looking at the fact, but both internally they need to be more family friendly and externally as well, whether they're service based or product based. Because again, as we're saying, mums are the gatekeeper, and if you're not family friendly, they're not going to purchase from you. So down to how you advertise to their children and how you advertise to them I think it's becoming more and more important.
Okay, I'm going to get you guys to think about some of your best case studies about what things you think work. Any questions around Bailey and what you can and can't do ethically in terms of the law, or what you should be doing?
What was the outcome? Because I've written a lot about this on my blog and was also on the IAB for some time. And the thing that kind of really stuck in my throat was the fact that kids can't do peer-to-peer marketing, but actually a lot of it was infringing on employment laws. So children can work from the age of 13, they're in the theatre, they're on TV, they're in advertising. And I felt it was actually an infringement of children's rights because there were these top-line scary things thrown out, and the Bailey report I thought was 99% great. But obviously here we're here to discuss life online, and I think the kind of things that they were trying to get across about life online are the things that haven't quite been resolved. So I just wanted to wonder what your thoughts were on all of that.
Anyone want to take that? I think particularly the over 13s is, again, this
13
grey.
to 16,
13 to 16 was
They
definitely a
have
grey
rights.
area. Yeah. I think we haven't got a pass there. First stumped question. Very good. Sorry, can we have a?
Here you go.
I'm not sure it's working.
You mentioned about gratuitous posters in schools, but then supermarkets have gone for it with big Tesco vouchers, computers, and I just wondered what the balance is. Are they doing it very well? Are they going over the line? Because they do get a lot of posters in schools.
So there are very formal sort of relationships set up between the schools, and that is one of the things that has grown more is this sort of public-private partnerships around those. What schools need to do. And we were trying to get someone from a group called the National Schools Partnerships who do quite a lot of that work, and they weren't able to join us. Have you done anything like that at Doco?
No, not directly, but again, it's that kind of nasty grey area. If Tesco's have got posters in schools which are talking about their fruit and veg, then that's not a problem for many people. But if they've got posters up in there talking about, obviously if they've got posters up there talking about Call of Duty, then it's an issue. But if they've got posters up talking even about Kung Fu Panda, then is that too far? But then most parents, love DVDs, and family film time is a fantastic bonding experience. So it's just that really nasty area of, one man's meat is another man's poison. It's like, when can a commercial partner get involved? If they're selling you fruit and veg, that's okay. If they're selling you something else, that's not okay. Where is the line of the products that commercial parties are allowed to sell to kids, or is that line that they shouldn't be selling anything? In which case, and then we enter this whole other discussion about how, schools make decent money out of this, and therefore if they can't subsidise it through these means, does that mean that education gets worse, or does that mean that the state has to put? So it's a very murky grey area, but I think it's one that is it's riddled with questions that it's going to take such a long time to try and unravel, because so much of it is around a person's opinion on something, much rather than it is a kind of cut and dry, this is good or this is bad.
Any more questions on this area? So one of the things which I've sort of taken away from both Byron and Bailey is very much about, you need to have your own set of ethics, and increasingly we're seeing companies with their own code of conduct, what they stand for, and spending quite a lot of time making sure that they know what they're doing and not just tripping over into it. Of course, there are lots of companies also who wouldn't necessarily think they're marketing at children and then sort of find out the hard way. I remember a site that I saw recently for an unnamed I think it was a crisp company, where they did a brilliant UGC, user-generated content tool, where you could create, it was a beatboxing tool, and in the first week they had loads of kids up there making fantastic beatboxing sort of little sequences. What it did was you could do the sound, and you could make little animated animations with just a flipbook type thing. By the second week, it was riddled with lots of penises and making all sorts of noises. And they just hadn't thought about this. And this started to turn into a bit of a PR shock for them, and then they had to sort of unravel and quickly get some moderation in. So I think there is a hell of a lot in this area about knowing what you're doing before you're going into it and thinking through the consequences, which hopefully, I'm going to look to Mo first, good examples of people who are doing this responsibly, ethically, in your view, sort of campaigns that you've really liked.
I probably one that springs to mind, and I probably should have thought about this a bit more before coming. But one thing that jumps to mind was the recent Sainsbury's advert, and I like it from the dadvertising, because, sorry, that's a horrible cliche. I went there, didn't I? Sorry, I like it from the marketing to fathers perspective. So what it was, I don't know if you remember it. It was the the father and his son going out for a day to the beach, and then they kind of had sandwiches on the beach, and then they kind of got home, and then they sat down and watched a movie, and it was a really, really nice story. And I think, you know, I've just finished this white paper about marketing to fathers, and I kind of came up with this whole kind of 4 key strategies. And those strategies are about reducing the amount of effort it takes to be a good dad. Second is reduce the financial burden of being a good dad. And then on the kind of plus side, it's about increasing the emotional benefits and increasing, again, the kind of financial benefits of being a dad. And what I liked about that is kind of when I came up with these 4 strategies, there were lots of people who picked on one of those and did a very good job at kind of showing the emotional benefits of being a great dad, or kind of doing the very utilitarian helping you be a great dad. But I think that what Sainsbury's did with that advert is they really hit the T of getting them all right, because it was very much around kind of good quality father-son time. There were lots of stuff around how the son was mimicking what his dad was doing, which is a real kind of emotional thing around seeing your kind of your genetics in your son is a very kind of powerful emotion for fathers. So there's lots of stuff where they were both sat down wearing the same thing, eating in the same way, which is really resonates well with fathers. And also the fact that the whole thing was around doing it for a lot less money. So it wasn't about, you know, you'll be a great dad if you take your family of 5 to Disneyland for $2,000. It was, you'll be a great dad if you, nothing wrong with Disneyland, it's fantastic. Actually, you don't work there anymore. Well, but they're fantastic anyway. It was just a really nice example of spend good quality time with your kids. Doesn't have to cost a lot of money. And then at the end of it, also one of the things about marketing to fathers is they still like to feel, try and pick the right words here, they still like to feel that they have sexual prowess as well. So one of the important things is that they don't lose that, and that they are considered to be, you know, still kind of, you know, men.
And what did your research?
Well, it's interesting. Yeah. The ad ended with the father and the son sat there watching the telly, and the mum coming in and being really pleased that the dad. So in a very loose way, the fact that the mum really appreciated what the dad was doing. So it was just a really nice overall, I liked that as a good example of kind of speaking, not in the normal way that you would imagine a supermarket to, where they could go down the really easy route of going, hey mums, it's cheaper if you come to Sainsbury's. They just had a nice play on it.
Julie, have you got a favourite?
I probably should have thought about this as well. The one that springs to mind actually is, we talked about product placement. There was a really clever campaign done by Childline in the Stardoll virtual world last year, where I don't know how many of you know Stardoll. I'm not personally signed up to it, but the premise is that you have an avatar and she's terribly trendy and you dress her up and you make her clothes and she has a room. What they were doing, they were giving as a kind of a must-have item, a green Childline phone that you could put in your room. And it was a trendy-looking thing. It was a wee bit, from memory, it was a bit retro. And it got across a very good message about the importance of that, particularly for girls, possibly, and for tween girls, that service and that being available, but having it as part of the gameplay. And I thought that was a really clever way to do it. And it was a huge success for Stardoll. And I just thought that was a kind of, going back to my BBC roots, a very public service way to drop in product placement as opposed to now go to New Look.
Jane, I know you've got a sort of a regulatory hat on, so you've got to be careful about what you say. Can you find any examples of stuff that you would like to sort of draw as?
Yeah, well, in fact, just following straight on the material that springs to mind in the context of helping children understand how to behave online and enjoy it and make the most of it is a recent material that I saw launched by the BBC based on their Horrible Histories series, which is they've produced some very powerful and engaging content that communicates messages about reputational risk and how to look after your personal data and think about your privacy and also long-term implications of sharing content online, which was launched last week as part of Safer Internet Day. And for me personally, that's a very powerful, compelling way of communicating with children about kind of messages that they may not necessarily want to sit down and listen to because they're there doing other things. So you've got to try and get their attention first of all, and that content worked for me.
that obviously pro-social messages are easier on the sort of the ethical line. I'm bringing Jules in. You know, when you start getting into the dirty subject of people who are buying space and doing, you know, wanting to buy access to your community effectively, what's worked really well at Mumsnet?
Kind of, as I've been saying, is it's very difficult because it's their community and it's a place where they come to talk to other mums. So it's not really somewhere that they are necessarily going to interact with advertising. Branding is obviously very important and brand equity is very important. So the successes on Mumsnet has really been brands that have integrated into the community, and that's a real kind of key word for us at Mumsnet is integration. And it is really allowing the Mumsnetters to engage in peer-to-peer marketing rather than you marketing to them. So I have to say I've got lots of very good examples, but to bring Ford in, Ford is a really good example of a brand that I started talking to in 2006 about advertising their people carriers to mums, and previously they only ever advertised them to dads or men because the idea was that men don't aspire to people carriers, so they need to convince them that they want one. And my argument was, well, don't bother with the dads. Get the mums. The mums want the people carriers. Well, they might not want them, but they need one. And get them to convince the dads. And it took Ford quite a long time to decide that, no, we advertise to men. And eventually, they came around to it. And in 2009, rather than just doing some MPs and leaderboards across the site, what they did is we started off with a car test. So they gave 5 brand new people carriers to Mumsnetters for 3 weeks over Christmas, gave them some video cameras, and they did video diaries. And they included their kids, their own parents. The cars were amazing. They had, the DVDs in the back, but the video was brilliant because it was basically mums talking about how great this car was to other mums. So there, we've got a great shot of a mum in the car, and she's talking to camera. They had them basically on these kind of tripods in the car, and you've got the kids in the back with their headphones on, watching Disney DVDs, and you've got mum, and she's talking to camera while driving, saying, "This is brilliant. I'm listening to my inappropriate music on the school run. Kids can't hear it. They're listening to DVDs. Everyone's happy." And then you've got other shots of them pulling up, at the end of the school run going, "Oh my God, all the other mums were looking at my brand new silver S-Max. I was the coolest mum on the school run today." Or you've got the kids running around the car going, "Oh my God, look, we want a Ford." We carried these videos on Mumsnet, and, the views were incredibly high. They ran a competition to obviously get people to watch it as well. But it was basically, rather than Ford saying, "Hey, look how great, feel the difference, look how good our cars are," it was mums talking to, the like-minded mums to say, "This is a great car." And yet, I'm not particularly interested in the size of the engine or, the fuel capacity, but it's a really nice car. It's comfortable. It's great to drive. It's not too big. It's easy to park. Fits all the kids in. You've got one of the mums going on an IKEA trip saying, "It's the first time I haven't had an argument with my husband because everything fits in the car." So for Ford, it was basically, it's very simple, and they did it throughout the year. We did 5 test drives. One was just a day where it was about the whole family. So it's again bringing the kids in as well, and kind of because they, as we've been saying, they have a choice. They're going to say, "I like this car, I want to be in this car." And parents listen to what they have to say. But they also did things like they took the Mumsnetters to Donington for the day. So again, it's kind of breaking those stereotypes if it's only really dads that want to do that. No, the mums loved it. 75 Mumsnetters being raced round at ridiculous speeds around the racetrack, but also off-roading themselves in the Ford Cougar. They absolutely loved it. Again, we videoed it. Before we'd even put up a feedback thread on Mumsnet, they were tweeting about it, or they were on Facebook, they were blogging. So, they love this kind of, and they love Ford now. Ford have worked with us for 3 years because Ford have interacted with them, they talked to them, and they asked them what they want. One of the big things that came out of the first test was that the Mumsnetters love the cars, but they wish they had sliding doors. And Ford brought out the C-Max with sliding doors, which they launched at Donington to the Mumsnetters before it was even the cars were on sale. So that's a really good example of a brand that's kind of embraced, talking to mums with the idea is that they actually are going to purchase their cars.
And did it actually demonstrate an uplift in sales? How do they measure it?
We do pre- and post-campaign surveys. So actually, from the first test drive, the 5 Mumsnetters who drove the cars, 2 of them brought brand new Ford S-Maxes. So that was a great ROI. We also had, which is a very Mumsnet thing, we had emails in from people saying, we had one mum who emailed in, who's disabled, who said, we've just bought a Ford S-Max because I can fit my wheelchair in the back, and I would never have got my husband to agree until he read the reviews on Mumsnet. And also in our post-campaign survey, 26% of Mumsnetters were more likely to buy a Ford since the work they'd done with us. So that worked incredibly well, which is why they're still working with us into their 3rd year. But it's just a really good example of, rather than just talking to them, talking at them, is actually getting them to talk to each other.
And the authenticity of them.
Absolutely.
Not edited, not...
Yeah, I mean, actually,
censored.
when we first did the first videos, we showed them to Ford, and they actually said, well, it's all positive. Can we put some negative comments in? And we were like, there weren't any negative comments. So, you know, it is that kind of thing, positive recommendation. And actually, some of the research we've done on Mumsnet is they love our product testing, and it's very important to them. But one of the things they do say is they love to see a negative recommendation, not a negative, sorry, a negative comment, because it basically means that it's something that, it's unbiased, something you can believe in, because not everyone's going to think it's great. Obviously, for advertisers, that is one of the problems that we come across. I don't think I've ever had a client meeting where someone hasn't said, what if someone says something bad about us? And the answer is always, you know, if you don't want to hear the answer, then don't ask the question, because you will get honest, unbiased, unscripted feedback.
So we're coming close to our time. Questions to the panel, otherwise I'm going to get them to come up. I'm going to give you a few thoughts to think of 3 points that you think you must do for campaigns in the future.
I just wanted to ask Jules a little bit about cause marketing and whether there's anything in your experience.
Sorry, could you just repeat that again?
Sorry. I just wanted to ask about cause marketing and whether there's anything that they've been able to get mums behind that a brand's done really well.
Do you mean like campaigning?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's another big area for Mumsnet, which has really grown over the last couple of years. So it all comes from our community. So that Let Girls Be Girls was a big campaign for us. Another big thing was lads mags, for want of a better word. So Zoo, Nuts, those kind of lads magazines. The problem that Mumsnet has had with that was that they are in supermarkets. They're not regarded as pornography, so they're not on the top shelf. They're basically on the bottom shelf. They're basically right where your toddler is in their buggy. They're grabbing them. They're seeing, you know, the particularly pleasant front pages with girls with their boobs out. So Mumsnet were very much, they didn't want that. They didn't want their children having to see those kind of things. So basically, we, on their behalf, campaigned to newsagents and supermarkets to either cover up the front with sort of a perspex cover, or to put them on the top shelf, and all bar one signed up to that. So that is a great example of the power that when a community of women come together. Another good example is actually based around advertising, which is, I don't know if many of you saw the advertising campaign for Think Britain, which was on buses saying career women make bad mothers. Mumsnet were absolutely up in arms about that, as you can imagine, as 2/3 of Mumsnetters work. And basically that idea that it's okay to say that if you're a career woman that you make a bad mother. Obviously the idea behind the campaign was to spark debate, but our point was you can still spark debate without being offensive. And obviously this is an outdoor ad campaign, so children our children are seeing that and saying, well, hang on a sec, my mum works, so does that mean that my mum is a bad mother? And that's another example of the Mumsnet community mobilising themselves, and that campaign got pulled 24 hours later because it just wasn't acceptable. But there's lots of other, charity campaigns where we work a lot with Oxfam over in the developing world on maternal mortality. So again, it's that, getting a community of women behind a cause and it being important, but it's very much we reflect what they're interested in. And for us at the moment, Let Girls Be Girls is our biggest campaign.
Very quickly. One question. Okay. Do you want to quickly come in and then we're going to wrap up? And I'm sure you can catch people outside as well.
Yeah, I was intrigued with some of the stats that you showed at the beginning of the panel, talking about the evolution of women in the household and how they're becoming bigger voices of power with the decision making. They're the gatekeepers, and I'm noticing that across a lot of the brands I do brand marketing for, because this presentation is around family circles and parents. Whatever happened to the voice of men?
They haven't got any.
Mic's off, you're not allowed to speak.
Yeah. I feel like the only man on the planet. I have to be the one that talks about it. I agree with you absolutely, and I think the interesting thing is that actually women have had control over the household purse for decades, if not centuries. You know, originally kind of back in the kind of late 19th century, they were the ones that were controlling how the family budget gets divvied up. So in many respects, actually, the move towards mum being a really key and interesting play happened in the kind of 50s, 60s, you know, kind of in that Mad Men territory. We start seeing, if you watch Mad Men, you start seeing them kind of realizing that the women are the interesting ones. I think actually what we're seeing now is, I believe that we're kind of maxing out actually the amount of money that advertisers are investing in specifically targeting women. I think has probably reached a peak. And I actually think that we're going to start seeing it flip the other way more. And I actually think that they're going to start realizing that actually dads make a decision about what shampoo is in the shower as much as women have an opinion. And you know, I think there are still large sections of the household budget that the mother will control, or the women in the household will control. But I think we've gone too far. I think in many marketers' heads, it's like 90% of the spend of the household is dictated by the women. And I think actually we're going to start people realizing that, you know, to be honest, I don't even think it's 50-50, but I think it's more like 40-60. So I think we're going to start seeing stuff coming back towards, actually, we can talk to dads, and we can talk to dads about family, which is the other thing as well, and we can talk to men about family. There's no reason why, whenever you're talking about family holidays or whenever you're talking about family purchases, that it should be the woman as the default gatekeeper to that decision-making process. I actually think there's some really interesting stuff to be had around actually talking to the man of the family as the key gate holder or the key decision maker around certain products.
While you've got the mic, Mo, we're running out of time.
Okay.
My
three things. Actually, number one is don't forget the dads. So I'm glad you kind of raised that. Number two is the classic thing, which is in all marketing, which is help me, don't sell to me. So kind of listen and react. And I also think there's a really interesting play around coalition marketing. I don't know how that's going to happen or what's going to happen there, but there's a really interesting case study with the Ford stuff around how getting mums and kids together, sell it to them first and get them to then sell it to dad is a really interesting mechanic. I don't know how you do it, but I think there's that if you can crack that nut, then there's a really interesting play.
You're speaking for the dads and Jules is for the mums. I'll speak for the kids and what I know about them. Three things. What to use in terms of marketing? Games, girls and boys, actually. Where? Watch for Twitter. I think Twitter is coming up. Perhaps not the younger end, but certainly that sort of teenage. They're getting on Twitter more and more, and I think that's going to rise. And finally, on what? You touched on it, I think, Jane. It's not just about the laptop. Kids can get online now on their DS, on their network game console, and increasingly, and the portable sort of device of choice is not necessarily the smartphone, it's the iPod Touch. So they can be on that and on Wi-Fi anywhere. And I think look at the device usage of children as well and how you might use those in terms of specific marketing.
Jane, do you want to take this or do you want to pass?
I'll take it, but I'm coming from the media regulator perspective, much more about thinking about children and helping them make informed decisions. So I guess my three are that, as you've seen from our research and everybody knows, children are a massively diverse group by age, social interaction, cognitive ability and literacy skills. So thinking about catering for that diversity. The second area is very much about looking at the collaborative industry initiatives that are happening. If you're not already involved, then there are some great things happening through the UK Council for Child Internet Safety about consistent messages which really help parents and children understand what's going on. And the third one is hopefully, I guess, in terms of our work here, consider that, for example, children don't necessarily think about privacy when they go online and their personal data. They don't really understand, most of them, how Google works. And so thinking about it from the child's perspective about how they're interacting in their world are all good things that can help children really make the most of the great benefits of being online.
And Jules, fine.
Not sure I could do it in 3, but I think the thing that we always say when we talk to clients is, don't patronise these women. They're very intelligent and very media savvy. Don't just treat them as mums. They're women who have children. Ask them, don't tell them. Listen to what they then say. Being honest with them, be transparent with them. And I think the sort of Mumsnet mantra is, engage with them, then entertain them and endear them. And when you get them on your side, they'll tell everyone how brilliant you are.
Great. I'd like you to thank Jules, Jane, Julie, and Mo. We've got to get out of the room very quickly. Thank you.